It's a very well-known reading taken from the Gospel of John. Some time after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up onto a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for all these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they'd all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them, and they filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off to cross the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Amen.
Thank you very much, Val. I'm always in 2 minds when I look at the lectionary reading and I see one that is so well known and think, dare I go there? Because people have heard it a million times before. What could I possibly pull out? But then I'm thinking, well, you can't just avoid things. This is the word of God, and we need to hear it. And maybe you can hear the same thing twice over and get something completely different out of it. So it's my only reading, and it is one of the best known. Just a little bit about John first, because I am a great believer, as you probably are aware, in the context of things. And John is the last remaining disciple when he writes his gospel. It's it is the last gospel written down. And all of the other disciples that he spent those 3 years with have died, usually, mostly by martyrdom. They have died for the faith. And John is left as an old man writing his gospel. And one of the reasons he's writing it is to address a heresy that has arisen. And the heresy is to do with the divinity of Jesus, as to whether Jesus is fully human or fully divine. Because as today, people struggled with it back then, the whole idea. And so many people were coming up with this idea that he wasn't actually a real person. He was a sort of phantom person, and therefore he was fully God, but not fully man. And therefore it's in John's gospel that you see some of those ideas explored. The humanity of Jesus. The shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. You get it in John's gospel as Jesus stands at the grave of one of his closest friends, and you see his humanity. It's John that tells us how Jesus gets hungry, that Jesus gets tired, that Jesus needs to go and pray. Simple human needs. but it's also John's gospel that emphasizes again and again the divinity, the full divinity. 7 times in John's gospel, we get Jesus saying, I am the bread of life, the Lamb of God, the way, the truth, and the life. I am. That's where we get Yahweh from. So John is making it very clear. This guy, Jesus, is fully human with all the emotions that you and I have, but fully God. And it's in this story here that we see something of his humanity and something of his divinity. Now, a bit of geography helps. I don't know how well you know this part of the world, but the Sea of Galilee is north of Jerusalem. And in the previous chapter, Jesus was in Jerusalem, healing a guy at the pool of Bethesda. And he's gone on the walk up north to Galilee, Capernaum, and then to the very north of the lake at Bethsaida. And there's crowds. The numbers are staggering. The numbers are truly staggering. 5,000 men. So you're talking probably at least 20,000. This is an army-size group. And I want to just go through the different characters in this story, because I think we will find ourselves in at least one of these characters. And I'm going to start with the character of the crowd, if I may. The crowd has heard about this guy, Jesus. Now, I wonder if you were told that there's an amazing preacher at South Brent, whether you would all be prepared to kind of up and walk to South Brent to listen to him. Because that's about the distance from Capernaum to Bethsaida. It's about that distance. And of course they walked. Huge number. Now, I've got a picture I want to show you. I'm learning from Dawn here at the moment. She's really into art. And I found this one on the Methodist art website. That's not what it's called, but something like that. This is where there we are. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's a picture of the feeding of the 5,000. And obviously it'll look much better if you saw it on a screen close to, in better light and all the rest of it. But it kind of depicts, it's almost like a Sunday school outing, a Sunday school picnic, where there's just loads of ordinary people with their kids lounging around, sitting around, having a picnic, and they're all kind of focused on something. And when I looked at that picture, it just struck me that these are ordinary folk, ordinary people, but with a hunger and being prepared to walk the distance to South Brent. Some of them would have walked further. Some would have walked about 9 miles. And that's a fair old hike, because they've got to walk back as well in the heat of the afternoon. The day will be drawing on. And they haven't gone fully prepared. They haven't got everything. So, are you hungry enough for God? Are you hungry enough to move on with God? To go and seek him out? And what is it they do when they find him? They settle down at his feet. And sometimes we're so busy looking that we forget to settle and get in a sort of receive mode. But they kind of got that. But we notice a bit further in the story that many of them had these kind of wrong expectations of who Jesus was. They clearly understood there was something really amazing about him, but he wasn't the king they wanted. They wanted to make him king so he could kick out the Romans, restore Jewish sovereignty. He wasn't the king they wanted. I wonder if Jesus is the Jesus you want. Whether you've sort of been searching for him and you've found something which doesn't fit your expectations, maybe leaves you confused. And then next character in the story is Philip. And Philip's a local lad. He's from Bethsaida. So Jesus says to him, where on earth are we going to get food. Where's the local Tesco's that's going to have enough bread left in the bakery to feed this lot? And Philip's one of the guys who thinks with his head, is ruled by his mind. What else are you going to think with? That's a silly thing to say. He's ruled by his mind, which tells him, he does the maths and says, no, there's no way we can afford it. He doesn't even think about whether there's anywhere that can provide for this amount of people. He just says, we cannot afford it. So therefore it can't be done. So he kind of fails the test. And in steps Andrew. And you notice how Andrew is described, the son of Simon Peter. Now, how would you like, no, the son of Simon, the brother of Simon Peter. Is that the way you want to be known, as the brother or the sister of somebody? If I asked you, can you think of an amazing thing that Andrew does, an amazing miracle he performs? I think you'll be struggling. If I asked you to think of an amazing moment where Andrew preaches and thousands are converted, you'll be struggling, because he doesn't stand out much. But what he does do is he brings somebody to Christ. He brings a young lad. A couple of years or some time earlier, he brought somebody else. He brought his brother, Simon Peter, to Jesus. And if you think towards the end of John's Gospel, on the lakeside again, where Jesus has that conversation with Simon Peter, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, where he reinstates him and says, you're going to be responsible for my church. You're the rock upon which I'm building it. It started with his brother, Andrew, bringing a small lad to Jesus. Now, maybe that's you. Maybe you're somebody who isn't known for amazing things. But maybe what you do is you help people to come to Jesus. And perhaps the bit I find most encouraging in all of this is when Jesus instructs the disciples, the next character in the story, the disciples generically. He says, get them to sit down and feed them this. Notice all they had to do was something very simple. They had to be obedient, but they didn't have to do the miracle themselves. But it was partly through their obedience that the miracle happens. And that's most of us. Sometimes all we have to do is our bit. Follow the simple instructions. Be prepared to do it. Even if you think, well, this ain't going to work. Just do it anyway. And watch the miracle take shape around you. And then there's a small lad himself. And what do we know about him? Well, we actually know that he's very poor, because he's got barley loaves, and that's the cheapest kind of loaf you could get. That was the very, the sort of 10p a loaf special basic version at your local shop. Barley loaves. And he offers the little bit that he has, even though it's worth so little, even though the quality was poor. The fish would have been the little sort of tiddlers. What could anybody want with that? And of course the metaphor is so obvious there, that Jesus takes the little we offer, no matter how poor quality it is, and he does something amazing with it. He multiplies it. I love the word when it describes when they've eaten. The crowds had eaten. It says they'd eaten their fill. The word in Greek is they were glutted. They were absolutely stuffed. Many people, when they've done commentaries on this, they've tried to do away with the miracle aspect. They've tried to suggest that, they just shared their picnics they'd brought anyway. I I know I've got a certain sort of shape to me. But there's not many picnics that I'm provided with that actually fill me. I'm rarely glutted. I might look like I am, but I don't feel like I am. This whole group of people were glutted, stuffed silly, and then 12 baskets of food left over. So each of the disciples personally sees, because they've collected the evidence, that something stunningly amazing has happened, and they've been part of it. Remember John's reason for writing his gospel. He's making a point here. This is God. God takes the little and he does something incredible with it. But where are we amongst those characters? Are we the one who looks at the possibility of a miracle and says, no, because I'm a Philip and that can't happen? Are we the one who's not known for anything, but we just bring people to Jesus and then things happen? Are we the little boy who offers the little we have? Or do we pull back, afraid to offer that, thinking that it's just not worth it? It is worth it. No matter how little the thing you want to give, the thing you have to give, Jesus, God, could do something amazing with it. But then we get this little bit at the end of that miracle. Jesus has kind of got some me time again. He's gone up the hillside and he's looking down at night time. One of the other gospel writers tells it's the fourth watch of the night. That's heading towards sunrise. We're in the last stretch of the night, heading for dawn. They've been battling against these waves, this weather, all night. They're going to be absolutely shattered. It says they've managed to get 3 or 4 miles. The lake itself is about 4 miles wide. They're getting nowhere. And they spent all night. You can't get the stuff. They've been going all night, getting nowhere. And Jesus sees this from the hillside, and he comes down to them, and he says, well, I'll read it. It's me. I'm not a ghost. Don't be afraid. Now, even when they've seen the things they've seen, they have just seen a miracle with Jesus at the center of it. Previous to that, just before that, they saw him heal a guy who'd been crippled for 38 years. And he meets Jesus and he's healed. They still don't quite get it. But here, they see Jesus. And it says they were willing to take him into their boat. And immediately, the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Now, you may feel that you're stuck in that boat. You've met Jesus in some form, in some way. You kind of know that he can do amazing things, but you're still not quite grasped that he's there for you. And he's got a plan for your life. Listening to Phil earlier, you could see that he's full of what God is doing. And maybe he didn't see it back then, but he can see it now looking backwards and a little bit looking forwards of what the plan is. But maybe that isn't your experience. Maybe you're kind of fighting against the waves. You feel like you're getting nowhere. Feel like you're working your socks off spiritually, but it isn't working. And Jesus says, it's me. Don't be afraid. That's where you welcome him on board. And you'll get there. You'll be where you should be. The struggle will be over. Now, I hope that meant something to somebody, because in many ways that's all pretty straightforward, and it's just going through the characters of the story. But we often forget that they're real people, and we all carry our baggage, and, just as they were real people, they had their baggage. They meet Jesus, and he's a challenge. They saw miracle after miracle, and it took a while for it to sink in. And maybe we're the same. But Jesus says, let me come on board. And the struggle will be over. You'll be at the other side. It's that simple. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. I'm going to ask Carla to come back on.